Welcome everybody who is listening. This is episode 1 of season 4. Yes, y'all didn't know this is now a whole season of love dripping from the walls. And what we are up to this season, what we are talking about is the intersectionality and the experience of BIPOC and LGBTQ. And if you're scared of acronyms, we will make sure that you know exactly what that means. Become very clear very soon. And I have a co-host this season. Yes. I have a co-host this season. Her name is Jamie Smith. And hold on just a second here because I'm going to read off this woman's credentials because she's a freaking badass and a half. So Jamie is not only just a dear friend of mine, I just love you to pieces, but she was a staffer for Obama in 2008, 2012, and then again for Clinton in 2016. She was very active in the Washington State Democratic Party, being on the executive board of King County Democrats, precinct committee officer for the 37th Legislative Democrats, the Democratic National Convention? No, DNC. Yeah. Yes,
delegate.
I'm right.
Yes.
Okay, I'm right. Democratic National Convention delegate representing the 9th Congressional District, served on the board of Washington, of Emerge Washington, which recruits women to run for office, rock on, and ran herself for Renton City Council, which is when I met you, is when you were running for City Council.
Absolutely, yes.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much for being my co-host this season. It's already been a blast putting this together with you. Also, a shout out to Paul Martinez, who was on this call as well, who helped me put this together. And as you get to know everyone that's going to be on this season, they're all just like badass people and a half. So Jamie, I'm going to rock it over to you and say anything else that you'd like to say about yourself and why you said yes to being my co-host, and also what you want people to get out of this season.
Sure. And Elizabeth, thank you so much for having me. You know, the love is mutual, so we could totally be like, geeking out over each other for forever, but people have things to do. I am here because when you brought this idea to me, I was like, this is my passion. I love creating space and being able to have these candid conversations, that are so critical for our advancement as a society, and for the individual liberties of the people who live, in these societies. So I just, I want to keep it conversational. I want to keep it kind of a good space for us to be, completely free, but at the same time be very introspective about our perspectives and how we can continue to help people understand, the differences and eventually be able to synthesize those differences into their own lives. While at the same time, just letting everybody know that it's okay to be us, and whatever us is, and whatever us is for you, faithful listener. So thank you so much for having me, Elizabeth. I'm super excited to be here. Super excited to be here with Ra and Paul and Brian, and let's go.
All right. Fabulous. Yes. Okay. So what we are talking about in this first episode is intersectionality. What is it? I mentioned at the beginning of this, like 5 minutes ago, that we're talking about the intersectionality of BIPOC and LGBTQ. What that is Black, Indigenous, people of color, and LGBTQ, for those people who don't know what LGBTQ is lesbian, gay, trans, bisexual, queer, and then there's also the plus of all of the beautiful, wonderful things that fall under the LGBTQ umbrella. And so I'm not going to go around and introduce people individually. What I'd like to do is just to get started in the conversation. And then the first time that you speak, I just want you to take the first, minute that you speak to introduce yourself and whatever you'd like people to know about you. So inside of intersectionality, what we're talking about is, what is it? Like, what is intersectionality? Why is it important to talk about, and how does it affect you? Like, what is that actually, what is like taking intersectionality, not just from a concept, but like, what does that look like in your real life, and how does that affect how you get to be in the world? And so we're sticking with the definition of intersectionality that is the original definition of intersectionality, which is, intersectionality is a lens through which you can see where power comes and collides, where it interlocks and intersects. It's not simply that there's a race problem here or a gender problem here and a class or LGBTQ problem there, right? So for our first question, so what is, inside of that definition, what does intersectionality mean to you, and why would you say that it is an important thing to talk about? Who would like to share?
I'll jump in. So in my mind, in my mind, this definition is the original definition that was coined in 1989 by Kimberle Crenshaw, who is an African-American activist and legal scholar. And the operative word here for me is power. So it's one thing to kind of think about, all the different identities and kind of like, oh, well, we're talking about identity politics, but that's not what it is at all. What it really is about is, how does power intersect, power and privilege, and where it actually kind of either collides or combines to create a truly inequitable system, or where it can possibly combine to actually increase equity for people in society. And while we call ourselves going towards the latter, we see a lot more of the former than we really want to see. Oh, come on.
I was like, that was beautiful. Who's going to talk to my girl?
I guess I'll jump in.
Everyone's intimidated by you, Jamie. I'm sorry.
I could go. My name is Ra, or it's Sarah, but I go by Ra, and it's either one. I have people that, like, Paul would know me by Sarah. I wasn't Ra when Paul knew me. But then I moved out to Seattle, and I embraced this like persona of Ra, and it's like the best part of it's like who I am, right? And so I don't get offended when people call me Sarah, but I go by Ra now. But anyway, thank you so much for having me on here. I am in like shock about how put together this is, and like when I saw your podcast and was just like, oh, like I'm gonna be on like an actual podcast, and then you ran down the credentials for Jamie right now, and I thought I was like on CNN, like getting ready to like get interviewed for some interviews. So now I'm like,
oh, I know people.
I'm like, ooh, gotta get my good face on. So basically, yeah, like I identify as a Black queer woman. I rarely say lesbian, but that's definitely what I am, even though, sexuality is fluid and all of that. Like, I'm just definitely, there's not like I'm like 99.99999% like into women, right? So, and I say that like tiny percent for men, where I'm like, oh, that was weird. I don't know what that was, but like, cool. So basically, I'm also Mexican. And my grandma, like my mom's side of the family, is like all Mexican, and I'm really Afro-Latina, but I don't identify with that, and I honestly have been wanting to now that I'm getting older. I grew up in New Mexico, where it's very, the majority is Hispanic. I'm not sure why I didn't identify with those roots. It might have been because you look at me and people see Black, they don't see Latina. So they're just like, I got treated differently because I was Black, not because I was Latina. So I think I just that's what I was identifying as, right? So yeah, but I think that intersectionality, I didn't really learn what it was up until like this last year, and I was like, oh, because my friend was like, well, you got to really like, with intersectionality. And I was like, what's that? And she was like, girl, she's like, you are literally the definition of intersectionality. And I was like, oh, I'm gonna have to look into that then. And so it's just been kind of a journey, like I said, dealing with all of these boxes that I fit in, kind of, being queer, being Black, being Latina, being a woman, it's like a lot. And so I just kind of work on embracing all of them and being proud of each box. And so now I'm hoping that it will all form like one giant box instead of little ones, like Russian stacking dolls, like, right? So now I want it to just be like this one and that's it. And we don't have to like unlayer them. But that's kind of how I see it. But yeah, that's just my 2 cents.
Yeah. Well, first of all, like, thank you for that's a really clear example of how like as lived intersectionality exists. Like we shared the definition of it, and Jamie kind of shared it in a more conceptual way, which is important to like know the concept of intersectionality, but to hear how it actually shows up.
Absolutely.
And your friend was like so spot on, where they were just like, you were like the definition of intersectionality.
So that was like one of those posters where, where it's like the team's rowing and then it has like the word on the bottom. They were like, you'd be like the poster. And then it's like the intersectionality. I'm like, oh, good to know.
Yes. With your sweatshirt and everything.
Yeah. With my sweatshirt. Just like, yeah.
Oh my God. Okay. So, Jamie, did you want to say about that?
Actually, I mean, what's really interesting is how your intersectionality, I think that, I'd love to hear from Paul and Brian and see if this is the same thing, but it was almost kind of like something you were, not something you were actually conscious of, right? Because it's just, because a lot of times when we talk about intersectionality, it's only a thing for people who don't experience it, but people who do experience it, they're just kind of like, oh, this is just real regular life Tuesday for me. So, it's kind of interesting how you didn't notice it until someone had to point it out to you. And it's like, yeah,
Yeah, I can definitely agree with that. It's like something, it almost reminds me of code switching.
Yep.
And how when like I'll hear someone talking about code switching, like it's this ability, but I think for me, it's never been something I've done purposefully.
Right.
Like code switching is something that just if I'm at the family barbecue, I'm one way,
in our blood.
If I'm hanging out with like a bunch of queer people, I'm one way. If I'm hanging out with a bunch of parkour people, I'm one way. If I'm on set, I'm a different way. And it's never like a conscious thing. It's just something that's kind of been like being a part of, like what Rob was saying, being a part of so many different boxes.
Yep.
You just kind of get used to, like, it's almost like a survival mechanism of like, oh, where am I right now? What am I doing here? And I think the intersectionality is really similar, where it's like, oh, that's a thing? I didn't know. Like, do y'all not do that?
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah. Well, Brian, how about you go ahead and introduce yourself again now that we can hear you?
Yeah. Sorry about that. Yeah. Of course, I'm the one with the technical. So my name is Brian Prince. I am a Black queer person of color from Seattle. I am actor, stunt performer, artist, illustrator, moderator, talker. I don't even know. I just do things, and for some reason, people keep giving me money at different places, and I'm like, okay, I'll keep doing that. But this is really special for me being here. Honestly, this is probably one of the most. This might be one of the most like trying to figure out the wording like out I've been publicly in a situation because I've been on a journey over the last 2 or 3 years to live my life as wholeheartedly as possible. And so when you asked me to come on the show, I was like, yes. I didn't even think. I was like, yeah, let's do it. It's got to happen. So really happy to be here. And yeah, sorry. Was there a question or?
Well, the original question before we couldn't hear you was, what does intersectionality mean to you, and how does it play out, for you? Like that was,
yeah, I guess.
Also, sorry, I'm going to add something else because you said the word code switching. So can you clarify for listeners who don't know what that is, what code switching is as well?
Yeah, so code switching is, as far as I know, it's just kind of like it's almost like the different dialects of our personalities that we adapt to in different situations. I've always seen it as somewhat of a survival mechanism. If I'm hanging out with mostly white people, I kind of more or less talk in a way that's considered, hasn't been considered in the past, mostly white. And it's not something I'm doing to fit in. Well, it is something I'm doing to fit in, but not necessarily like consciously as much as I'm just like, okay, I'm adapting to this situation. And I think it's funny because similar with what Rob was saying, I hadn't actually been familiar with the concept of intersectionality recently. But the way I kind of see the whole thing, code switching and intersectionality coming together, is just that, like, as someone who's never felt like, so I'm also 6'10", so I'm super tall. So like, I've kind of lived the life of always not belonging to whatever group I'm in. I'm either like too tall or too this or not this enough or not this enough, whether it's like black, queer, masculine, whatever. And so I feel like living a life of many boxes and many hats, there's a lot of places where all those like kind of combine, and then I don't know, it's like it's one ambiguous experience and not just like different categories. Do you guys agree with that? Is just like how I feel about it?
Yeah.
I would totally agree with that. Yeah, absolutely. So you find yourself in all these different boxes, and you're just trying to connect with all these different people, and all these different stratas. But because of the way that we've lived, I think that those different people would not accept you if you were your authentic self. And so you have to kind of, speak a certain way around white people, speak a certain way around heterosexuals, speak a certain way around, around men if you're a woman, or women if you're a man, those types of things. And so, because we naturally live that way, it doesn't seem like intersectionality, but it is, and then when we start talking about policies or movements and things like that, them not taking that into account actually does us a disservice. It's kind of living at the intersection of all these different identities, but here I am getting academic again. So let's get back to
well, anytime you do that, I'm gonna be like, wait a minute, no.
Go for it, Paul. We haven't let you talk yet.
Yeah, so I'm Paul Joseph Anthony Martinez. My pronouns are him, she, and I am a gay male. And to kind of piggyback off of what everybody says, I also grew up in New Mexico. I'm Latino, but I'm also part Native American. And I grew up around, where I grew up is close to Texas. And, so I find myself in these phases of where I had to be a certain way in order to fit in. Like at one point I had like a long goatee and I was part of a rap group, because that's necessarily what I wanted to do, but that's what I found myself in the moment doing so I could fit in where I was at. But at the same time, a part of me, I felt I'm very feminine. And I love that part of me, but I found myself at times having to hide that in a way when I'm around, masculine heterosexuals or, certain groups. So it's very interesting how I've had to adjust. Yeah. And just like Brian, I've been on a journey recently the past years, really getting to know and fall in love with my true self.
I love that. Also, just to speak to Paul, thank you so much for sharing that. And I think that what all of you shared is really poignant in that, there are different groups of people that you have to be a certain way around. And what Brian was saying was like the survival mechanism. And just to give excuse me, just like I didn't hear about intersectionality until I went to college. And as a white woman from the Midwest, this is just not something that I have to ever deal with. Like, white is my world. And I didn't actually come out as queer until later on in my life either. Because I just thought that everyone loved women as much as I do, because why wouldn't you, obviously? Like, doesn't everyone feel this way about women?
Y'all?
And then I found out that they don't. Nope, Elizabeth, that's just you.
Oh, you don't look at her like that. Cool.
Oh, we don't all talk about boobs that way. Okay.
Yeah, me neither.
Yeah. I don't feel that way.
Right.
That was a joke. But anyway, inside of my world, it's like I didn't realize that intersectionality existed until I went to college, and I was a political science major, and I also majored in women, gender, and sexuality. And I took a political science class that talked about intersectionality, and it wasn't until then that it was just like a brick over the head. I was just like, oh yeah, duh, Elizabeth, people don't have the same experiences as you. And if you are a person of color, or if you are queer, or if you are an intersectionality of those things, that your life is totally different. Like, it honestly really didn't even occur to me that was, and then as soon as it got pointed out, it was like, oh, of course it's that way. But it honestly wasn't even something that occurred to me, because, like you said, just as much as, Rob pointed this out so beautifully, where it's just like, that's just how you lived, or live, still alive. That's just how you live. And it's not something that you think about in that way. But I think that it's really, one of the reasons why I think it's really, intersectionality is really important to talk about, is because we do live like, however our experience is that's the experience, and me liking women, I was just like, doesn't everyone feel this way? And me being white, I'm like, doesn't everyone just experience the world this way? Like, it really wasn't until it was just like, no, Elizabeth, not everyone experiences the world the way that you do. That it was like, but then it was like, I couldn't even be aware of other people's experiences enough to even do anything about it, or speak to it, or like know that anything was going on, but beyond what my experience was, until that got pointed out. So just from my perspective, like, as a white person, like, that's why I'm just like, I want people to know about this, because I had no idea.
Yeah. And I think it's an important thing to say, because I think we tend to, at least coming from like an American perspective, we tend to value knowing. We tend to value being like, I know, oh, I understand, I know that. But I think one of the most powerful things we never admit is, I don't know. I have no idea. And because I think that's when we kind of open ourselves up to listen and to learn things. And I think especially this year, like I had a really crazy experience, and I bet a lot of people did. Like, after the George Floyd murder, I had a lot of people reaching out to me and being like, are you okay? What's going on? And then I had this strange reaction to where it's not that I was necessarily fine. I was just like, this happens all the time. Like, why are you acting like this is a new thing? And then I realized for the first time, a lot of white people that I know were like, it's almost like they saw it for like the first time and were like, oh, wow, you're dealing with a lot. I'm just like, I think it's so important that we talk about this stuff now, because it seems like people are at least trying to listen. So,
can I piggyback off of that? So I think probably all had similar experiences. My phone was blowing up after George Floyd, and I was literally just like, people in my everyday life, but then there was people from like my past that I was literally like, I didn't even know we were friends on Instagram. Like, and you just DM'd me asking if I'm like, who, like what? Right. He's like sending prayers your way. And I'm like, okay. So like in my head, I was thinking, I went through this, like, first off, like I was kind of blunt, like with her. Like, I just said, like, you know what? Fuck your prayers. Like, I was basically like, I haven't talked to you in years. It doesn't work for school shootings. It's not going to work for this. I kind of like went off. Right. And then I realized, like Brian just said, oh shit, this is the first time that like people are actually, I think one of the reasons that happened, the click in my eyes, was maybe COVID, because people were in this quarantine and they had no escape, and they didn't have their work, their sports, their going out with friends. None of that was there to like distract them. And then to top it off, the second one was, it was 9 minutes, right? So usually when you see footage, it's like 2 minutes and they're like desensitized and they're just like, oh, that's so sad. Moving on. Like, Judy, where's the garlic? Or like, where's the scones? Or, you know, whatever. and like straight up, that's what it was. I think it was just 9 minutes is a lot for anyone to see, if you have human blood pulsing through your veins, you sit in front of a TV no matter what, and you see someone getting choked out for 9 minutes because of the color of their skin, it's going to fuck you up no matter who you are. And I think a good amount of people were like, kind of like, what the hell? This is awful. And then it opened up a door for people to be like, hello, it's been happening for 400 plus years. Ha ha ha. Like, hey, this is our moment to kind of like talk and do all these things. And so, and you know, obviously it's getting, now that we're in this reckoning, this racial reckoning, it's still getting talked about. And currently now, obviously with like what's going on with Breonna Taylor and like the charges for the like white neighbors and not the black neighbors upstairs, and the missed bullets, not the actual, like if those bullets had hit Breonna, if those missed bullets had actually hit Breonna, there'd be no charges. Right. Like, let that sink in for a second, if you really think about that. So it's anyway, I just wanted to piggyback off that and like say, I think that's what the difference was that I think COVID, in a way, since it had us hunkering down and we couldn't escape, and have, including myself included, like I had basketball and all these other things that usually distract me, and I went through it. And so that's why I kind of went off on that girl. Because like I said, we weren't like friends. I hadn't talked to her like seriously since like maybe even high school. I didn't even think we talked in high school. I was shocked she like reached out. So anyway, that's what I wanted to say.
I want to bring Paul into the conversation. You know, how has this impacted your life, especially, you know, as you're navigating the world as, you know, as not only a Latino man, but also a Native American descent?
Thank you. It brings up a lot of emotion. Growing up, I grew up, I was jumped by a group of men. I've been shot at. I'm not Black, obviously, but, with the whole George Floyd murder, it still brought up a lot of, feelings for me. In New Mexico, where we were at, and I know Sarah can contest to this, we went to school in Las Cruces. Anytime that you left the city, you had to stop by Border Patrol. And, what it brought up for me was like, every time I stopped, I got treated differently. They would go through my car, or they would bring the dogs out. But if I was with other, with my white friends, it was perfectly fine. So it really brought up a lot of feelings for me. And I had a lot of friends who were like, let's go protest. And I was like, I'm not going to put myself in that situation. Like, I want to protest. Like, I want to help and support people. But I know what it's like to, be jumped. Like, I am not fortunate enough to be able to hide my feminine side of me. As much as like in high school, I told everybody I was masculine. I was like joking to myself. Everybody knew I wasn't masculine. I'm not, I can't do that. And, so me going out there and putting myself in a very vulnerable situation to be attacked. And I was like, I'm not going to, do that, for myself. So it was really hard. I felt very powerless during that situation. And then, I had friends reaching out to me as well. And then, sharing with them, like, oh my gosh, I didn't know that you have to go through that kind of stuff. And I'm like, yeah, that's, something that I have to deal with and I have to be conscious of on a daily basis.
I think like one thing, if there's one thing I would want, I guess cisgendered, like non-marginalized people to understand in terms of like intersectionality and like a lot of the feelings, especially for what Paul just said, is especially now with COVID. So like having to wear a mask all the time, and like there's this feeling, and I think this is why people are going crazy in like Costco's and stuff. But like having to wear a mask and being like, there's this like fear of like, I don't want to get sick. Like I don't want to get COVID. There's like this underlying feeling of like fear. And I want people to know that like that's something that some people feel every single day, even if it's not a pandemic. Like that's something that like holding hands in public, you know, or like Paul saying like being who he wants to be, or like being the only Black person in the town. It's like that fear of like, I hope I don't get COVID. Like some people have lived with that their entire lives.
Exactly.
Yeah, that is so real. And it's interesting with intersectionality. You know, as a pansexual woman, you know, but I'm cisgendered, I tend to lead with my Blackness. You know, whenever I think about, you know, okay, all the different ways that I could possibly, you know, experience harm or anything like that. First is because I'm Black. Second, maybe because I'm a woman. Third, maybe because I'm pansexual. You know, that sort of thing. And so it's one of those things where, do you ever find that you lead with one identity or the other, and you have a hard time kind of integrating some of them sometimes?
Definitely. Yeah, definitely. For me, I mean, I like I was saying earlier, my dad's very, you know, like militant, like, you know, 60, I think he's like 63 now. And, Black dad. Yeah. Very Black. And, yeah, very Black. And, you know, and so like growing up, it was more like the box. I think I had brought this up, like the checking the box and the thing. It was like, check Black. And I'm like, okay, but like, you know, my grandma is like, you know, 4'11", like very brown, speaking Spanish every day. Like I'm definitely Mexican. And like, you know, again, he's just like, yeah, but like, and to this day, like those boxes are so confusing because it'll say like, if you check Hispanic or any of that, it'll say Hispanic, but not this. And it has all these like things. And I'm like, but I am those. So like, why would I not check both boxes? Like that makes no sense to me. So I've always just kind of led with my Blackness in a way, because like, which is kind of funny, like when I say that sentence, because in my head, I'm like, okay, I guess in Santa Fe, New Mexico, growing up, like I was like perceived as, because I was the only Black girl in my class.
Yeah.
So it was like, I was real Black. Like, you know, like I went to a Catholic high school, like, and like, they were just like, yeah, you know, that's Sarah. Like, you know, she plays basketball. That's our token Black girl. Like, you know, and then like, and I know that like no one else said that to me, but it was like obvious what was going on. And my brother was 4 years older, and he was also the only, like one of the only, I think he was him and this other guy. No, I think he was the only Black guy in his class. And so then, you know, as things go into time, I go to college, things like that. I'm still in New Mexico, so I'm still kind of not surrounded by a lot of Black people. And I still have never, even in Seattle now, I mean, I live in Redmond now, and when I get around like 3 or 4 Black people, like I will literally just be like having the time of my life and like doing my thing and code switching probably and all these things. And then I'm just like, oh, I can only imagine what it's like to be like a part or like in like a city where like there's just, it's predominantly Black, right? And you can just be like, there's so many Black people, but I've just never experienced that. So I've always been too Black, and then, which is kind of funny because I'm mixed. So then it's like, how am I coming out? Like, and then when I'm around Black people, they tell me like, oh, but you're mixed, like you light skinned. So then I'm like, oh wait, now I'm not Black enough. Like, interesting. And so, and then it's like, and then to top it off, I was severely closeted in college as well. Paul can probably attest to that. Like, I was very like, oh my God, like men are so hot. And it's really like, they were not. Like my college dorm room had Johnny Depp, Zac Efron, David Beckham, and someone else. And like, they were all like shirtless. And I'd just be like, welcome to my dorm of just delicious white men. And people just be like, okay, you're kind of over, like, it's pretty obvious, you know? And meanwhile, I'm like turning on Glee and seeing Santana, and I'm just like, oh my God, like, she's just so pretty though. But no one wanted, this was me. But basically, yes, to answer your question, wow, really long, kind of roundabout way of saying, I agree. I find myself not sure where to lead. And sometimes I code switch. I don't know if that's a thing, code switching your intersectionality, like which box you're going to use. I'm going to use this box today. I'm going to use this box. My fiance is white and her parents live in Woodinville. So when I'm over in Woodinville, like I'm code switching it up. Like I'm just like, her name's Janet. Like I'm like, Janet, pass the salt. These peas are great. Like I'm all about it, like, And so it just kind of depends. But yeah, so it's just.
And I had the opposite experience than Sarah because I'm from New Mexico as well, and I am Latino. But kind of like she was saying, there was times where I felt like I wasn't Latino enough. Yeah. Because I didn't speak Spanish regularly. I had people tell me like I should be embarrassed because I don't know Spanish. I'm not okay. Well, I'm not. And but I would lead with my feminine side, and so I would have to like change it up, depending on where I would go. And yeah, it's just so interesting, having to switch. And I totally relate to what Sarah says when you're having to mark, Hispanic, because I'm like, okay, but I want to mark the other boxes that I am. Right. Like, why am I limiting myself to just one thing? Like, I'm proud of all of it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh man, Rob makes me feel so seen. So much like that you said about growing up. I'm like, me too. And so like, a lot of stuff I don't want to say, but yeah, I guess adding on to what both of you guys said is the leading part. It's I don't know. I still feel sometimes like, am I like, who am I really? Like, is this faking it? Is this faking it? I don't know. Because yeah, growing up for me, one of the biggest things was just like not feeling Black enough. That was a big one for me. I was a very nerdy kid, hung out with my brother a lot, and I grew up around a lot of white kids, and it's not even something I like knew or thought of actively. It was just who my friends were. And so when I got into high school, and I remember distinctly, it's when like Chappelle's show got popular. And then suddenly all of these white kids were like, oh, haha, explain this sketch to me. And I'm like, I saw the same thing for the first time that you saw. I don't understand either. Why I'm like, and suddenly I'm this encyclopedia of like, Brian, explain why this is a thing. And I'm just like, I don't know. And then it was like disappointing. And then it was like, why don't you know that? And from both sides. It was like
you are Dave Chappelle, aren't you, Brian?
Oh yeah, exactly. Right? And then
you wrote the skit.
I know you wrote this skit. I know you know. Why don't you write this secrets? And I'm just like, oh my god. And then like just all kinds of other ways too, where I felt this like heavy pressure to like listen like whatever popular hip hop was at the time, but then like in my headphones, I'm listening to like My Chemical Romance. And so it's just never knowing, like yeah, like it always feeling like incorrect in a way where it was just always like it was hard to just like relax and be. And I think it's such a privilege sometimes to get to just exist without these feelings of wrong and right and like I'm supposed to, and the shoulds. right. And so yeah, I think for me leaning just no, I don't even know. It's like I've leaned with a different part of me every decade at this point. So.
You took me back with that My Chemical Romance right there. I mean, I was definitely into all of that, but like shamefully, right? Like I was literally like listening. Like I remember I would like be listening to it like with my headphones and like being like, and then I'd just be like, they can't like hear, right? Like I'd be like, oh yeah, because I just got that like Tupac album, bro. It goes hard. It's like, and they're just like, I hope they can't hear that though.
Well, that was like for me. Like I grew up, I had a lowrider. Me and my family were building me a lowrider car, and I was like, kind of lowrider bike, and I was listening to like Dre and Tupac and everything. But then in my room, I was listening to Janet Jackson and Britney Spears, dancing around.
You like knew on all the moves to Rhythm Nation.
guys. I was like the only Nirvana grunge girl in my high school, Black grunge girl with flannels and everything, and in Nashville, Tennessee, in the backwoods. So it's kind of like, yeah, you know, you don't really know what, you know, you want to be yourself and you want to be all those awesome things that comprise you, but you kind of feel like you have to be one or the other. There's always or, there's no and. You know, do you ever feel like even within your identities, they're not completely comprehensive? Like, for instance, my militant Black father, you know, is always like, oh, let's do all these things for Black people and for the melanated and all that sort of thing. I'm like, Black trans people are getting murdered at, you know, a very, very high rate. You know, he's like, oh, we're not worried about them. Oh, yes, we are. Because we are worried about all Black people, not just, you know, and you ever find those things as well?
Definitely. Yeah. My dad is, and I like I have a complicated relationship with my dad because it's like we both love each other like deeply, but we're not close. Right. And so like, I know that like, it's like that man has done a lot for me. Like growing up, he could have easily, like in the situations that we were put in, because my mom passed when I was little, like he could have easily portrayed that stereotype and like dropped us off and just left. Right. Yeah. But he never did. And so like, I give him power and credit for doing that because we could have been somewhere not in New Mexico and uprooted, and who knows where I'd be today. Right. And so I give him that credit, but yes, he's, you know, yeah, he's a strong, like militant Black man, can't show emotion, like can't, you know, stigmatize his therapy, don't want to talk about his feelings, like, you know, could be literally like having a stroke and be like, I'm fine. Like, you know, that kind of like, and it's like so sad to see, like, I'm just like, but you don't have feeling in your legs.
Feels like very like heard in this.
Right.
Brian just wants to reach up and be like, no. So yes, no, I agree. And I think now that I've been out, because I actually came out that's another story. But anyway, point is when I was basically, I'm now out to my dad, and he has now grasped, and I think he's getting that I'm just very happy and myself. And now that I'm getting married, like next July, like I think he's coming around to the idea of just almost like a sense of relief. And I mean this in the like, this is like a weird way to say it, but like it's almost like he's relieved that I'm a lesbian and that I don't have to deal with men, because he's like, he's a Black man that has like seen some shit. Right. And so I think in a way he's been like homophobic in certain places, but then there's times where it's like, he's like, well, shit, I'm actually quite glad she doesn't have to deal with men. And like, that's no, like, as like and that's not to be like all men suck, but I'm just saying like, you know, cause we all know that it can be interesting. So yeah, definitely. But the trans, I was gonna say all Black trans, lives matter as well. And it's so funny that it could literally someone who has been discriminated against his whole life, or like, you know, knows how it feels to be different, for some reason it doesn't hit when like trans, like it's just like, oh well, yeah, I mean, for sure, yeah, like I guess, like no, like they matter just like we matter. We all matter.
Right.
I made the sassy point to mention that when I made my obligatory like George Floyd post on Instagram, I like made this whole post about it, and then at the end I made sure to be like, and I see y'all that are trying to be like hard allies right now, but I've heard y'all say not great things about LGBTQ people. Right. And if you're going to stick up for marginalized people, you better stick up for all of them. Yeah. Then the big part of that was to like even people in my family just being like, this isn't right. And I'm like, yeah, but like, I heard what you said last year.
I know what you did last summer.
So, yeah.
Well, and some of it's not even what people say, it's what they don't say.
Absolutely.
Not saying anything when someone is, you know, over there bad-mouthing, you know, trans or gays or someone of color, that's just as bad.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. You know, and, you know, a lot of times I think we try to keep the peace, you know, by not calling out people, especially folks in our family, when they say that sort of thing. But at the same time, I think we also do ourselves a disservice, you know, because we're basically telling ourselves that we're not worth advocating for. And, we're not exactly helping the movement either, because, again, if you're going to be for all LGBTQ people, you need to be for all LGBTQ people. If you're going to be for Black people, you should be for Black people. If you're going to be for Latinos, you should be for all Latinos. So it's one of those things where, I think the generations that precede us, are struggling with that. But I think also, it's our responsibility to make sure that we're having these conversations with people who may not even have the different types of identities that we have, or people that do and don't realize that this is a thing,
Yeah, and I think that y'all are pointing out, though, one of the most important parts of intersectionality, and that really is to see, to see all people, right? Regardless of what, Jamie said, what do you lead with, right? And we talk, and y'all weighed in with what you lead with, and one of the things that you led with is your race, right? But being seen for not just your race, but your sexuality and any other ways that, and maybe you're also not an able-bodied person as well, which is not necessarily something that we're talking about on this podcast, but just to throw in that there are other intersectionalities besides race and sexuality as well, but really being able to one of the things that I see as most important about intersectionality is being able to see all people and to consider all possibilities of however people show up. So that way you aren't surprised. You're not like how I was in college, where you're just what? Not everybody's experience is a white girl from the Midwest. What? Which I knew intellectually, right? I knew that, but it was just it just didn't hit me that way.
Right.
And
I think what's also important is to realize, or to be open to, that not everybody has the same experience. Sarah and Brian's experience, even though they may be similar, they're still, their intersects are different. And it's going to be the same for me and another Latino gay male. Because he may not grew up in New Mexico like I did. So it's going to be different.
Yeah.
Yeah. And Paula, I would love to hear a little bit more from you just about your experience as well. And, and that is the last and closing question, which we've already been talking about, our experiences, but is there anything else that you would like to share about your experience inside of the intersectionalities that your identity encompasses that maybe haven't gotten covered yet on here?
I think the biggest thing for me is growing up in New Mexico, and it's such a strong Latin culture. It was really hard for someone to be openly gay. And in college, when I was first coming out, I had thought I found my first love. And, on Valentine's, I remember it specifically, he broke up with me. And the reason why he broke up with me is because he was so scared that if his family found out, that they would disown him and do him harm. And having to deal with, where do I go from here? It's because of his culture and because of what his family that is doing is what's going to pull us apart. And so it's something that I really had to struggle with, really come to terms with that happened. And it's not good that it happens.
Yeah. And then, and Jamie, I'd love to also hear if you have any other closing questions as we're coming to the tail end of our episode here. But one of the things that I like to leave people with is what are the actions that you see or that you would want, people to take from here? What's the one learn or the one action that, anyone listening to this episode that you would love for them to either take away or take on? And Jamie, anything you want to add? Yeah.
I'll go last. I want Ra and Brian and Paul for that.
All right, there you go. In that order. Yeah.
I just basically want the fact that in my head, I'm just thinking more like we've all had these open dialogues, I'm assuming, with people since all of this has happened. I would say it was George Floyd that did it, but we had Ahmaud Arbery and then like Breonna Taylor before that too. And so, but this year, we've had these open dialogues with people. And I think that just having that open dialogue with someone and just having that conversation, to me, is different from what I've seen where they just kind of shut it off. And so your listeners, for instance, if you have someone listening to this right now, the thing that I would even want them just to learn is just to be they're just listening. Like they're just taking it in. They're not just saying, oh, that's not a thing. Like, you know, intersectionality, whatever. So if I'm already kind of like impressed with the listener that's listening to this because they want to broaden and like, just, you know, better themselves. Like, I mean, I'm gonna make mistakes when it comes to certain things. And I know that, all of my, you know, friends who are white and allies, like they know they're going to make mistakes too. But the fact that they're just having these conversations now and not just ignoring it and being like, yeah, I don't want to talk about that. Like it makes me uncomfortable. Like that's what I'm glad to hear. So I've kind of already gotten the listeners. Like it didn't really answer, but like I said, I'm already impressed with that.
All right.
Yeah, I think definitely that too, like the listening. And I think on top of that, my thing I would answer is I encourage people who haven't or who are afraid to vulnerably share their stories, because I think a lot of times we keep those things in because we're like, oh, that's just something that I go through. That's just something I've been through. But there's something about hearing someone else's experience, and when it's so similar, you're like, oh my gosh, me too. And I think as humans, like we really want to be seen, we really want to be heard. It makes us feel like we matter. And I feel like for me, like I spent most of my life not sharing how I felt or what I thought. And then I started to, and I don't think I'd ever felt more like human and loved and like I belonged than when I just started sharing my experience and then watching and hearing people be like, oh, me too. And I was like, oh, awesome. Okay. So I would highly encourage that if people, you know, with people you feel safe with, obviously, don't just blow it up, like throw it down on Facebook or whatever.
Or you could, but there might be consequences that you don't like.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, I love what Sarah and Brian said, but I would also add, like, be a listener, get curious, and actually, you know, if you're listening to this, you know, take the time to go ask people in your lives that are of color or in the LGBTQ community, like what they, you know, think and what they've been through, and, you know, listen to them and then share.
And I think I would want to leave everybody with, you know, it's okay to make a mistake, even if you're wanting to be an ally and an accomplice. Even when people were talking about folks that checked on them after the George Floyd incident, you know, none of us said we didn't like it, you know, unless, you know, you're that woman who didn't talk to Raw for like, you know, 20 years and then came out of woodwork. You know, don't do that. But it's hard. It feels weird for us to be seen, but it's a good step for not only us, but it is for you too. So if you're listening to this, definitely continue to try and do that work. And, you know, if the person that you're talking to doesn't feel like talking about it, ease off. It's a lot of emotional labor. And so, you know, still keep searching, keep evolving, and keep pushing to, you know, get beyond your own experience, your own perspective.
Absolutely. Well, thank you all so much. I am so overjoyed, thankful, grateful, happy that all of you came on and shared everything that you did. And I just want to point out again what Jamie said is that like the emotional labor that it takes sometimes to share these things. Like, really, thank you for being here for that, being here so that people can listen, being here so that people do feel heard and seen. That was my goal in this podcast, is that people feel that people can listen and that people feel heard and seen, and that we can really connect in our own shared humanity. together, even if we don't have exactly the same experience. So really, thank you from the bottom of my heart for being on our first episode of season 4. I love you all so, so much. And we'll see all of you, actually. We'll see all of you on some episodes coming up. So thank you so much. I appreciate you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.